ladies and gentlemen, to Valley of Words, Dehradun's own International Literature Festival and Arts Festival. The Valley of Words Festival has been going on in Dehradun for the past several years, and this year we come to you online from the Savoy Hotel, Missouri. We are very grateful to Dr. Rajendra Duval, who is the DGU Cost in Uttarakhand, for having us on this session in the RST Forum. The RST Forum, as most of you know, is the Dr. R. Estoria Forum, who was a renowned civil servant, activist, and author.
Yeah.
So Dr. R. Estoria has authored over 100 books on Uttarakhand, and this is a special session which is held every year in the Valley of Words Festival that commemorates his work and his life. Our moderator for today's session will be Dr. Sameer Sinha, who is a senior Forest Service officer from Uttarakhand. But more than being a Forest Service officer, he is a great wildlifer and a crusader for sustainability. And we welcome Dr. Sameer Sinha.
Thank you.
And my co-panelist will be Ajay Sharma ji, who is a historian of repute and a birder, a great birder who has been bird watching in the valley and talking about the valley's history and introducing a lot of young people to the valley's history and its wonderful wildlife features. So over to you, Dr. Sameer Sinha, to moderate this session and begin the conversation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here with two very distinguished people, uh, Mr. Lokesh Ori and Mr. Ajay Sharma. Uh, Quickly, a brief introduction for both these gentlemen. Mr. Ajay Sharma is the quintessential Dunite. He did his schooling from a school in Dehradun and that is Scholars Home.
Yeah.
From Scholars Home. And he was introduced to bird watching at a early age. And apart from being the renowned historian that he is, his major interest is bird watching. And more importantly, he has introduced bird watching to several schools in Dehradun. He started off with an event for bird watching in Velam School in 2008, which is still going strong. And since then, he has got a whole generation of youngsters interested and initiated into bird watching, which is a wonderful contribution coming from him.
Thank
Our
you.
other guest panelist for today is Mr. Lokesh Shori. He's well known as an anthropologist, author, and activist who lives and works in the Himalayas. He describes himself as a wanderer in chief, and I think that's a very apt description for him because there's this Dehradun-based walking group, been there, doing that, that advocates responsible tourism and interestingly slow travel. And Mr. Ori is associated with that. Uh, his latest book, Till Kingdom Come, is based on the rituals of divine kingship in Jaunsar Bawar and parts of Himachal Pradesh. It has been published simultaneously by Permanent Black in India and State University of New York Press in the US. He has also recently authored monographs on the cosmology and iconography of the Ganga for the National Mission for Clean Ganga. He has a doctorate in cultural anthropology from the University of Heidelberg and was Marcellus Van Ingen Fellow at Redbow, Netherlands. He and his team are working with communities in Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh in the very interiors to promote community-based responsible tourism, which I think is the need of the hour in these areas. He is engaged in establishing an interpretation center and a research center called Humanities Himalaya in Dehradun, and which is in collaboration with scholars from US and Europe. Welcome to this forum, gentlemen, and it's my privilege to share this space with you. As Lokesh said about me, I'm a forest officer, but that's my profession. I describe myself as wild at heart. On that note, let's dive deep into the session straight away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my first question to both our panelists is something that has to do with the session today, the very idea of this session today. How do we see heritage? Because in many places, heritage is seen at times as something elitist, which is not really to do with the common masses. And my first question to both of you gentlemen would be, how do you see heritage? How do you define heritage? May I request Mr. Sharma to respond to this first, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. And it is wonderful to be with you people, And, let's take a dip into the waters of heritage now. For me, heritage is kind of, a manifestation of my being. When I say my being is it is about us. And it is about our traditions, it is about our culture, it is about our monuments, and it is about our past. Whatever has happened in past is becoming of us basically. So being sensitive to our heritage is being sensitive to ourselves. Knowing our heritage means knowing ourselves. So the very theme of this session is the conservation of heritage and conservation of the values we get from our ancestors and forefathers. The kind of strength we get from our forefathers. So heritage is a very important question for me, and heritage is the only way to look into us, to become what our forefather wanted us to become.
Thank you, Mr. Sharma. That was wonderful. Uh, Lokesh ji, how do you see heritage as somebody who has been working on this field for a long,
Yeah.
long time?
Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Siddharth, thank you very much. For me, heritage is not just about buildings. It is not just about monuments and manuscripts and archaeological sites. But for me, heritage has a much deeper and a much stronger meaning. It has a very wide ambit. It includes wildlife. It includes the songs that our grandmother used to sing to us, and it includes almost everything that gives us our identity. So heritage is something that we inherit from the past, which has a certain value for our future. And of course, we have also inherited several things from the past that have lost their value over a period of time. Like, for instance, the practice of sati or probably the caste system. So these systems have lost their value, we can discard them. But there are millions of things that are of great value that we have inherited from the past and which are worth preserving. And that to me is the essence of heritage that needs to be preserved for our future generations.
Wonderful.
Thank you. That was most illuminating, and it has rightly set the tone for the discussion ahead. Thank you for that. Coming back to Mr. Sharma, the history of Dehradun, the modern history of Dehradun,
Yeah.
dates back to the 18th century with
Yeah.
the establishment of the Dera here
Yeah.
by Guru Ram Rai ji.
Yeah.
I would like you to dwell a bit on that as the beginning of modern Dehradun.
Yeah, thank you very much. Lots of people ask me, and they have a question in their mind from where we got the name of our city, Dehradun. So we have to look back, it's like time machine. And we sit inside a time machine and go back to 1676. 1676 was a time when Guru Ram Rai came to Dehradun. And to dwell upon the history of Guru Ram Rai, he was the eldest son, of the seventh Guru, Guru Har Rai. And in the fight in the fight between the brothers to get the throne of Mughal Empire, Guru Har Rai was had a chance to support Dara Shikoh. And after Aurangzeb got the throne in 1658, in 1659 or 1660, he called upon Guru Har Rai to kind of present his situation, to present his case that why he helped Dara Shikoh. So Guru Har Rai has taken an oath, never to visit a Mughal court. So subsequently, in a Sikh congregation, it was decided that Guru Ram Rai, a 14-year-old son of Guru Har Rai, will represent the case of Sikhi in the Mughal court, and subsequently he went there. So with his answers and with his kind of intelligence, this young boy was very intelligent. He was well versed with the Guru Granth Sahib and the Sakhi of the earlier gurus. So he made an impression of on Aurangzeb, and subsequently became the friend, philosopher, and guide of Aurangzeb, and lived there for 20 years. But he always had a ambition to become a Sikh guru. But it was thwarted by one of his actions in the court of Mughal emperor, and he was kind of excommunicated from Sikhi. So in 1876, 75, when Guru Gobind Singh became the 10th Guru and he lost all his hope to become a Guru, he asked Aurangzeb to leave his court and pursue his spiritual endeavor, elsewhere. So Aurangzeb allowed him and wrote a firman for a Raja Teri to allow his friend to settle down in the valley of Dehradun. So Guru Ram Rai, along with his entourage, reached Dehradun in 1676 and pitched his dera. Uh, after first pitching in Bilaspur Kandli, he found this place conducive for his spiritual progression. So he pitched. He kind of established a dera there. The present where Guru Ram Rai Darbar is and Jhanda Sahib is. So when he established his dera there, thousands of his devotees, from all over North India, started coming in for his blessings. So whenever people used to ask, where are you going? किथे जा रहे हो? उन्होंने कहा डेरे जा रहे हैं हाँ. डेरा किथे है? डेरा देहरादून चहेगा. Doon was a place, Doon was the name of a valley. We have, several Doons around, in Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh. Doon is a name for a valley. And Dera is a name for it's a Persian word, which means camp. And camp of an army, camp of a guru, camp of pilgrims. So they started coming here, and subsequently a small township grew around the Darbar Parisar, and the Darbar area. And subsequently, people started calling the place Dehradun. And from here, the foundation of the modern city of Dehradun is laid. So Guru Ram Rai played a very important role in, in the development of Dehradun, in the development of rural areas of Dehradun, and he has impacted so many things in the coming generation.
Yes, that is why
Yeah.
even today the Jhanda Mela remains a very, very important day or event in the spiritual calendar
Yeah.
of Dehradun.
Yeah.
That is very, very
Yeah.
remarkable and interesting.
Yes. Yes.
Coming to Mr.
And later on,
Lori,
many.
sorry, coming to
Oh, I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Lokesh Ori, moving on now, let me ask you about the British influence in Dehradun. We have a lot of ground to cover, so we will try and cover these phases quickly but
Yeah.
succinctly. So I would like to hear you on the British influence on Dehradun.
Yeah. So, Dr. Siddha, the British influence on Dehradun started in 1814 with the Anglo-Gurkha War that took place in the Doon Valley itself. So the British, they for many years, they followed a consistent policy of not disturbing the kingdoms in the Himalayas. They knew that they could not rule over the Himalayas because of the terrain, because of the conditions, and they were not interested in this region because the revenues they thought would be very low. So, but it so happened in the course of history that the Nepalese came and occupied the regions of Garhwal, Kumaon, and several parts of Himachal Pradesh. So the British were very keen to defend the trade routes. They were not very keen to occupy the territory, but they were definitely very keen to uh, defend the trade routes from Tibet, because at that point in time, cotton as a commercial item was losing its value, and perhaps the next big thing that the British thought that they could trade in was the Pashmina wool, which would only come from Tibet. So their main concern was protecting these trade routes in the Himalayas, and that's why they engaged in this battle called the Anglo-Gurkha War. The first major incident of the battles that were to soon follow happened in Dehradun in the Nala Pani area, and became a very significant chapter in the history of both India and Nepal, because the Nepalese Gurkha fought very bravely. Uh, the British had not expected such a response from the Nepalese. And in the first few days of the battle, the British had lost 6 of their officers. So they were so impressed with the bravery of the Gurkha that they established a memorial in Dehradun, which is called the Khalanga Memorial, which even commemorates the enemy. So it's a very rare occurrence in military history that you commemorate the bravery of your enemy even when you have defeated them in a battle. So that brought the British here and brought in a lot of interesting officers like John Shore and Major Young. Uh, Perhaps we'll talk about Major Young later on. But Major Young ruled over Dehradun for over 53 years.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, the average life expectancy of a British officer in India was 46 years. So, yeah, and at a point in time, Major Young also was described as the king, in fact, of the Doon. So
Yeah.
such was his impact on the Doon Valley, and I think a lot of the things that we see now commonly in the Doon Valley, like for instance, his experiments with with growing tea and potatoes in the hills, and of course the establishment of Mussoorie, the hill station which will celebrate, uh, which will now is almost 200 years old,
200.
was established in fact by Major Young uh, and some of the other British officers. So the British have had a very strong influence. They wanted to establish the valley as an institutional space, and that explains the various institutions here, about which we will talk later. Uh,
Thank you.
so yeah, I
I would
think the
just,
British,
yes, please. Sorry.
yeah. So the British have had a very strong influence on the Doon Valley, and that is how the town has grown the Sikh and Garhwali traditions into a European uh, place.
Thank you. I would just like to add that it is interesting from my perspective that wildlife trade, even at that point in time, seems to have
Yes.
played a very important role in the destiny
Yeah.
of nations
Yes.
and places like our
Yes.
own
Yes.
Doon, certainly. Now,
Yes.
moving on, I would come back to Ajay Sharma ji and request him to share something about the temples of Dehradun.
Ah. As we were talking about Guru Ram Rai. So in his later years, in Delhi, when when he was, kind of excommunicated from Sikhi, uh, he joined the Hindu sect called Udasin. And with his coming to Dehradun, uh, uh, the influence of Udasin sect became very profound in Dehradun. So you find many temples here which have a very, very, Udasin impact on them. So we have great, temples in Dehradun, old temples, and one of them is Tapkeshwar Mahadev, which is considered to be a very old temple on the banks of river Thames. And then we have four Siddhs, in Dehradun. And these four cities are in four corners of the valley, four corners of the city. And these four cities are also, belong to Udasin sect of Hinduism. And basically, by that, in those times, Udasin sect used to be, the guardians of gurdwaras also, and we have a very important temple of Santala Devi in Dehradun, and there are forgotten temples also. And Lokesh ji must know about that. He has done a great work on Rispuna Valley temples. If you go into Rispuna Valley, you'll find desolate temples. Standing alone among the bushes and foliage. There are two temples in
Yes,
Kela Ghat and
in ruins.
the Tultulia, Ghat temple. And if you want to, uh, visit a real old temple with the oldest, deities and statues, and uh, uh, is Bhadraj temple. In Bhadraj, you will find the deities, which are the statues and the idols, which are more than 2,000 years old. And Baldev Swami and Balram Ji ka mandir is there. And then we have very old Chandrabani temple uh, in the southern part of the valley, Gautam Kund we call it, and from where the Asan River starts. So these are the important temples, and then we have very new temples also. Sai Mandir are coming up, and there are Tibetan monasteries here. A lot more many temples, but the older ones are what I've told you: Tapkeshwar, Fort Sales, Gautam Kund, Rispana Valley temples, very important, and Bhadraj. One must visit Bhadraj to see the ancient heritage of Dehradun.
How very fascinating. Now,
Yeah, can I add a little bit to
please.
this?
Please, you are
Yeah,
most
just
welcome.
one little bit, I think, which needs to be mentioned is that many of these old
Yeah,
temples, including the Guru Ram Rai Darbar,
yeah.
have some very beautiful wall paintings,
Oh yes, oh yes,
which need to be preserved, which needs to
yeah,
be taken up
yeah,
as part of our very precious heritage,
yeah,
because the wall paintings are very rare to find all over the
yeah,
country, and Dehradun has this profusion of uh,
yeah,
wall paintings which have survived all
yeah.
those hundreds of
And
years.
yeah,
Yes, sir.
and if I must, they're both schools at the same place. The Mughal school as well as the Pahari school.
Yes, yes.
It is really, a wonderful and fascinating site there. There's no doubt about
How very fascinating. Now, moving on, for many people across the country and beyond, Dehradun is synonymous with Basmati.
it.
But the Basmati link of Dehradun also has a very interesting history, and it has got an Afghan connection to it. So I would now request Lokesh ji to talk about the Afghan influence on Dehradun.
Yeah, so the word basmati, which is which if in itself reflects this beautiful long grained rice, which has a very distinctive smell. So the word basmati itself comes from this distinctive smell. That if the rice is cooking in the neighbor's house, you can actually smell the rice in the vicinity. So basmati has a very strong Dehradun connection. And even if you go to any stores in the US or in Europe, you, and you go to the rice section, you are likely to find uh, the rice marked, the finest rice marked as Dehraduni basmati rice. So the basmati came here, they must have been growing rice earlier as well. But it was in 1893 that the Amir of Afghanistan uh, was exiled in Mussoorie and Dehradun. That's how Dehradun and Mussoorie have several place names, which resemble place names in Kabul. Like for instance, we have the Bala Hisar, which is now the hill is now the Weinberg Allen School. We also have a Bala Hisar in Dehradun, and we used to have on the East Canal Road, the which is now the electricity department office, used to be called the Royal Hotel. So the Royal Hotel was the guest house for the Afghan royalty, and so the Emir of Afghanistan, Dost Muhammad Khan, he was exiled here in 1893, And so he and his family, they loved the valley. They liked being here. They loved the hunting because of the forests all around. uh, the one thing that they missed in the valley was the pulaus that they would get in Afghanistan. And so to get the right flavor and to get the right taste, they got the rice seeds imported from Afghanistan and asked the local farmers to plant them. And the grain took, I think it took very kindly to the soil of Dehradun, and and started growing here profusely. I think the flavor of the rice got much better when it was planted in the soil of the Doon Valley.
Yeah.
um, and and over the years, traders like so several traders that had shops and trading posts in Paltan Bazaar. Uh, they started trading in this rice, and rice became a very uh, yeah, a hallmark of Dehradun's cultivation and agriculture. So yeah, this is how global politics also affects our palate
Yeah.
and affects the food that we eat.
So next time we have any dish out of basmati rice or a biryani, we also know who to thank, our friends in Afghanistan,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
that. That I think
But
that's a
we
very fascinating story.
yeah, but we hardly grow any basmati
Any
now.
basmati rice now?
Yeah,
It's all been
actually, now
taken
that you
over
mention
by,
it, it
Yeah.
yeah.
is likely that the rice that is being sold in the name of Dehradun Basmati is
Yeah.
probably grown elsewhere. It has
Yeah.
remained
Mm,
now become mostly a marketing thing.
Right.
Hardly any Basmati grows
Right.
in
yes.
Dehradun
Right.
Valley now, which is actually very sad.
Right.
Now, moving on, there is also a very significant Tibetan connection with Dehradun. We have a Tibetan monastery and settlement in Clement Town. We also have establishments on Rajpur Road and also in Shastara. So I will request Ajay Sharma ji to talk about the Tibetan influence on Dehradun.
Yeah. When I talk about Tibetan influence, then I always say, it is like Buddhism revisiting the valley, It was a part of Mauryan Empire, and there is a Kalsi rock edict, which says that, and much part of the Western Dune is still, under the soil, There's no archaeology and there's no digging done there. So, with the extradition of, with the fleeing of Dalai Lama from Tibet in 1958 and coming in there in India, he was shifted to Missouri, for a brief period, in Birla House, and most of the Tibetans, were allotted a place in Karnataka, but somehow Tibetans, they found Dehradun more, conducive for their living, And as a young child, when I was maybe 10 years old, the people of Dehradun must remember a wave of Tibetan traders sitting on the Patel Park, now Patel Park area, and selling sweaters, and wonderful, machine knitted sweaters, And we used to, wear those hand knitted sweaters and quite coarse ones, So suddenly, people started getting those sweaters and getting a kind of aware of the Tibetan community also. And we used to call them bhotiyas, All Tibetans were known as bhotiyas in those times.
Okay.
Now we call them Tibetans, but in those times we used to call them Bhotiyas, Bhotiyo ke sweater aaye hai. And they had a Bhotiya market also later on,
Yes.
where they are now, in either market they had a, kind of. So the memory of Bhotiyas or Tibetans, is very vivid in our minds, So they were given a kind of land for settlements here, and they settled here. And in India, the maximum population of Tibetans are in Karnataka. And we have around 20,000 Tibetans living in Dehradun. And in due course of time, they have, a profound importance effect on the lifestyle of Dehradun as well, And you see, the momo walas and the chow mein walas all around. It's just it's a Tibetan effect on Dehradun, and they have built some beautiful stupas and temples and great learning centers of their Buddhist practices. They have a Shakya college here. They have a college for different other sects also. So they are a very important part of the social life of Dehradun, and now they are struggling and they are in continuous struggle for their independence.
Wonderful. Now, moving ahead, another interesting aspect of Dehradun is its railway station. The railway came to Dehradun as early as 1899, which is less than 50 years when the first train came to India.
Yeah.
And I would like to ask Lokesh ji as to what is the influence of the railways on Dehradun as such.
Yeah, so Dehradun and its surroundings, they have been greatly influenced by the railway. In fact, very few people know about the fact that before the first passenger train came to India, the first goods train was used in the Ganga Canal, in the building
Yes.
of the Ganga Canal,
Yeah.
as early as 1855.
Yeah.
So this was a steam engine which was brought specially from England by Proby Cotley to transport materials from Pirankaliyar to Solani, where he was
Yeah.
building an aqueduct.
Yeah.
So the Jerry Lind engine that was brought here was the first train ever to run on Indian soil. And of course, when the passenger trains started coming into the Doon Valley, much before that, the trains were coming into Saharanpur, and uh, and Mussoorie had already grown into a very uh, popular resort, especially during the summer times.
Yeah.
So imagine traveling from different parts of India, from Calcutta, from Baroda, to Saharanpur, and then from Saharanpur you would book a Dak Gadi, which was an overnight kind of train, but it used to be pulled by horses. So the Dak Gadi would arrive at Rajpur, and then when you were fully rested at Rajpur, you could start walking up to Mussoorie to spend your summer vacation. So it must have been a great time, and gradually the trains started coming into Dehradun also, which emerged as a very significant terminus. Uh, so the train has had a very significant impact uh, because the railway here then started to establish institutions as well. Like for instance, the Oak Grove School in Mussoorie became a very significant place for the wards of the railway employees to study. And we have to imagine a time when the railways used to carry a lot of luggage as well, because when people came to Mussoorie, they did not come like they do today. They drive from Delhi and spend a weekend in Mussoorie and get back. People would come for the entire season, so they would
Yeah.
bring the entire season supplies with them on the train, and they would book it in the service agencies. So there were these agencies that were bringing huge quantities of luggage as well, because people were spending 3 months, 2 months in the mountains. So must have been a very interesting time, and ever since then, the railway has a very profound impact on the valley and the surrounding areas like Haridwar, which emerged as a as a pilgrimage site. Uh, it's always been a pilgrimage site, but approaching Haridwar became very easy because of the growth of the railways. And now, of course, we have railways attempting to enter into the mountains as well, all the way to Karnaprayag.
Yeah.
So let's see what happens in the future.
Now let's move on to the natural heritage of Dehradun, and the first stop here for me would be the rivers of Dehradun. As we know, Doon Valley is bounded by the Yamuna and the Ganga rivers, but there are also a lot of very interesting tributaries like Song, Rispana, Bindal, and Suswa that drain the Doon Valley. And I would request Ajay Sharma ji to talk about some of these rivers and what they have added to the Doon Valley.
Thank you very much. See, river system of Dehradun is very elaborate, and this is one probably the only valley which is 100 kilometers by 25 kilometers, flanked by the two great rivers of the country, Ganga and Yamuna fed by the towns. Apart from these two main rivers, and which take the discharge from the western part of the dune and the eastern part of the dune, separately, and the Rajpur Hill, kind of divides this line between the eastern dune and the western dune, So we have a separate system. If we start from the western dune, after Towns and Yamuna, we come to a river called Swarna. Swarna is a river which comes, which flows from the foothills of Mussoorie, and from the, Hatipau area and the Dudli area. And it is one of the cleanest river we have in Dehradun, After Swarna, and we have river called Nemi River, Nemi comes out of the hillock below Mussoorie, which is just the backside of Petroleum University. If you go to the village Bidholi, there's a small stream, perennial stream coming out. It's called Nemi, And few kilometers ahead, the Nemi River is met by a river coming from Basagad and Rikholi area, which is called Noon. And it is called Noon because it encircles the village called Kharakhet, And Kharakhet is very famous in Indian history because of the salt making agitation started by the Gandhiji, and the salt was made here by Indian nationalists in those times, So this Nemi and Noon, they meet the Choti Tons, and subsequently this Tons River goes down the Asan Basin, and and joins Asan River, Asan River starts from the Gautam Kund, and it is the only. There are two rivers, in Western system, Asan runs parallel to the Himalayas and join Yamuna at Asan Barrage. So then we have Eastern system. In Eastern system, we have, see, Bindal is a river, but Bindal is not perennial. Bindal is only rain-fed. You won't find any water other than in rainy season. After Bindal, we see Rispana. Rispana has always been in great discussion all the time. And Rispana meets Bindal near University, Doon University, and then, subsequently meets the Suswa River, So after, in the eastern part, we start with River Baldi. River Baldi starts from, in Sendara, the river is called Baldi. And after Baldi, we have River Bandal. And after Bandal, we have River Song. So these Baldi, Bandal, and Song, they are the main rivers which supply drinking water to half of the Dehradun. And now they are proposing a dam on Song so that they can supply 24-hour water to Dehradun. The Song River is the longest river, it's 106 kilometers. And the Song again meets Suswa, and they kind of flow towards Ganga, and they join Ganga near Chandrabhaga. There's another river which is called Jakhan Rao. If you happen to go to towards Rani Pokhri, There is a river Jakhan and Jakhan is also perennial, but it is fed by many other nalas also, you know. So these are the major rivers. We have total 16 different river systems working in the valley, you know, including Ganga and Yamuna, you know. And all the five major canal projects, you know, are made on these rivers, you know. So as far as the rivers are concerned, we are very lucky to have a great river system, but we are very unlucky that we are unable to conserve them, you know, and they are they are really degrading, you know,
Yes.
and they are in a very bad state, and people and the government must look into the matter, you know, and because these rivers they are responsible for the agriculture as well as the biodiversity of this valley, you know. If these rivers go, you know, the biodiversity of the valley is also endangered, you know, in coming time.
Yep, I can share with our audience that restoration and rejuvenation of these rivers is one of the top priorities of the government at this point in time.
Yeah,
And working with civil society institutions, we have started a lot of projects and a very encouraging results so far. Hopefully, the momentum will continue, and we shall be able to restore these rivers to their
yeah,
pristine glory,
yeah.
certainly in times to come. Thank you for that, Mr. Sharma. Now, quickly moving on, and a quick comment from me on the forest and wildlife of Dehradun. As we know, the Doon Valley is very rich in forest, primarily sal and its associated species. And from the wildlife perspective, two very interesting uh, things I would like to share with you. Of course, the Rajaji National Park that was established in 1993, and which is now the state's second tiger reserve because it was upgraded into a tiger reserve in 2015. And it is something that has always puzzled people as to why a protected area in the Doon Valley was named Rajaji. It was named after C. Rajgopalacharya, who was India's second Governor General and the only Indian to have held that post. The interesting history to that is that these areas were different sanctuaries, but the major chunk of what is Rajaji today was designated as the Governor General's hunting grounds.
Yeah.
When Rajaji became the Governor General, he was told that there was a shooting area that was exclusive to the Governor General, and he was kind enough to declare that there would be no further shooting in that area. So the protection in this area owes a lot to the sentiment and the vision of the then Governor General Rajgopalacharya ji, which is how this place came to be known after him. That is one. The second interesting area that we have here is a small sanctuary in Mussoorie called the Binog Wildlife Sanctuary. It's less than 11 square kilometers, the smallest protected area of the state. And it is interesting that this was established to protect something which is a very unique bird, which is the mountain quail, which is last reported in 1876.
76.
And it's known to science only by 12 specimens which have been collected from various places and parts of Western Himalayas. And the sanctuary was created in the hope that at some point in time, we will still be able to rediscover the mountain quail in this area and declare and show to the world that it is not extinct, but we were able to rediscover it. So we live eternally in that hope. Now moving on, another interesting aspect of Dehradun is the establishment of tea gardens here. And I would like to request Shri Ajay Sharma to talk about tea gardens and their history in Dehradun.
Yeah, tea is a very important subject, you know, and everything is happening around tea nowadays, you know. So,
Elections too.
Yeah, even this discussion can yeah.
so when the Europe was drained of its silver, when they started drinking tea and got addicted to tea, the silver they looted from South America was going to China, in lieu of tea, So by the time, there are almost, no silver left in Europe to buy tea. So the Britishers and the East India Company resorted to start an opium war, to pay, for tea in silver, and to kind of smuggle opium, and take the silver back, And in due course of time, they realized that they should look for tea in India itself, India and Sri Lanka. So they started, thinking seriously about it, and they made, serious efforts, to bring tea to India, And one Robert Fortune did a great job, and he smuggled around 10,000 saplings and millions of original Chinese tea
Yeah.
out of out of China via Hong Kong, and they started. In the northeast part, one English gentleman found the saplings of tea there too. And Dehradun, was a barren land. It was desolate. There was no agriculture left. After the Gurkhas, and these, as Lokesh ji called Colonel Major Young as the king of Suo king of Dehradun. So these guys, in 1838, they ganged up, and they kind of created 9 states out of the plains of Dehradun, and they started, enterprise, which was eventually stopped by the government itself, disallowing the civil servants to participate in land holdings in their own areas, But, the areas were enmarked, and by 1860, around 19 properties, 19 states sprang up, and they started dealing in tea. And we still have, the Arcadia and Harbajwala, where we have been a part of many agitations to stop, the construction of, or to stop the planning of smart city there. Uh, so it was in 1860 that the tea was seriously taken up in Dehradun Valley. And in one point of time, in 1870s, there were around 90 different states, producing around 3 lakh pounds of tea every year, and the best quality green tea, which was much in demand in, the Afghanistan and Iran, and the most important part is that there were Indian planters also, like Mahant Pritam Das holded, some land in Ambadi, and he was also cultivating tree. And there was a Dehradun Tea Company formed in 1860 in Harbanjwala and Arcadia, and they were cultivating around 10,000 acres of land, and producing around 125,000 pounds of tea in those times. We still have tea, and until few years back, there was an office of a tea, in Amritsar. Amritsar was the main kind of auction for the Iran and Afghanistan. So we still have, tea, but growing in this Guru Ram Rai Trust, areas in Vikas Nagar area, and they still, kind of they are selling this tea in new packages and stuff, And mind you, that Dehradun tea is supposed to be very good, because it is one of, they have a real a Chinese stain in that. There are no hybrids, because there was no development, there were no hybrids. So we still have, a Chinese stain in Dehradun tea. And but now, with all tea and basmati and limestone going from Dehradun's life, same is with tea now.
Thank you. That was again most fascinating and interesting. Uh, Another aspect that I would like Lokesh Oriji to talk about is the impact that various iconic institutions have had on Dehradun. And Dehradun is lucky and privileged to be home to some of uh, these very iconic institutions like the Survey of India, the ONGC, the Indian Military Academy. Lokesh, what is the impact and what is the influence of these institutions on Dehradun?
Yeah, I would say that the impact of these institutions is global because if you look at the Survey of India, it has its own fascinating history because of the Great Arc Survey and because of the various branches of the survey. So many people think about the Great Arc Survey as the greatest human endeavor ever because that
Yeah,
was a task which was started to map the entire South Asia, in the entire Asian subcontinent,
yeah,
and it was a huge endeavor which lasted about 54 years,
yeah,
where you were accurately mapping the entire length and breadth of the subcontinent,
yeah,
not just the India that we know today, but also the other countries which form a part of the subcontinent. And the great experiment ended here in Dehradun under the stewardship of Sir George Everest,
yeah,
who built his own house near Dehradun in Hathi Gaon, and his observatory, from where he started measuring the Himalayan peaks. So until that time, it was believed that the Andes and then later on the Kanchenjunga was the tallest mountain in the world. But in fact, it was these measurements and later on calculations done by people like Radhanath Sigdar that proved that the Himalayas were indeed the tallest peaks. And in a sense, George Everest got rewarded for his work also because his name was given to the tallest peak in the world, Mount Everest. So, institutions like the survey and, of course, the Forest Research Institute, they played a very, very significant role in documenting for posterity the richness of India's biodiversity, the richness of India's wildlife, the richness of India's forests, and also the shape of the land, uh, its topography, and and enhanced our knowledge uh, about uh, about the the land that we live in. And I think the impact of these institutions has not just been on Dehradun, but it has also been a great impact nationally and globally as well. Like for instance, if you look at the Indian Military Academy, the building of the Indian Military Academy is the Chetwood Hall, which started off as the railway school, uh, but uh, but gradually it became the Sandhurst of the East, and it has been training officers not just from India, but it has been training officers from Afghanistan, from Bhutan, from Burma, so from so many neighboring countries as well. So many of these institutions have had a very global impact, and even for that matter, ONGC. I think ONGC has also contributed significantly to the economic progress of the country, and they have also uh, tried to project their heritage in the form of the Oil Museum in Dehradun, which is erstwhile Maharaja Patiala's residence, built in the Art Deco style, has now been converted into a museum, which is worth visiting. So, when the British came to Dehradun, they had this vision of an institutional town, like in Oxford or a university town. And keeping that in view, they set up all these institutions in the Doon Valley, and and I think they have contributed immensely to life here as well as uh, across the world.
Thank you. I think no mention of the Indian Military Academy would be complete
Yeah,
without reference to Field Marshal Sir Philip Chetwood
yes,
and the credo that he left behind in his inaugural address. It gives me goosebumps even today every time I read it. And I would like to reiterate it here and share it with our viewers. The safety, honor, and welfare of your country comes first, always and every time. The honor, welfare, and comfort of the men you command come next. Your own ease, comfort, and safety come last, always and every time. I think that's a wonderful sentiment
yeah,
that our armed forces have carried with them all through. And it says much about the people who command our armed forces and who laid down their lives for our
true,
country.
true.
Moving on, there's some other interesting institutions also in Dehradun that merit acknowledgement. The FRI is one such institution, and it is important and interesting to note that the FRI, again, the FRI building, for example, is one of the finest architectural marvels in our country
Yeah,
stand today.
true.
And we will be celebrating the 100 years of that building in the not too distant future. Uh, the FRI campus is also home to what is the alma mater of the Forest Service in India, to which I very proudly belong. It is now known as the Indira Gandhi National Forest Academy, but the Indian Forest College was established as early as 1938. In
Yeah,
fact, the history of scientific forestry goes back to 1864 when a German, Sir Dietrich Brandes, was appointed as the first Inspector General of Forest in India by the British. And after that, a whole generation of foresters was trained in various parts of the world, including Germany. And it was only after the Indian Forest College was established in India that the training of forest officers started taking shape. It is also interesting to remember here that the Forest Research Institute was originally established in what is now the Doon School, the
Doon
Chandbagh
School, yeah,
campus of the Doon School. And from the Doon School, it moved to its present premises. Another very important institution for Dehradun is the Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy of Administration, or what is called as LBSNA or Lavasana in general parlance. It is the cradle of the civil service in India, and it came to be established in 1959 in the Chalville Valley. And I have very fond memories of doing my initial training up straight from a university, landing
yeah,
up in
yeah,
Missouri as part of the LBSNNA family. And it is again, it is an institution that has made its mark in public service and administration across the world. And Doon Valley is privileged, especially that of the three All India services, two have their national training academies right here. I think that's something also very, very significant. Moving on, Dehradun is also historically known for its schools. And I would request Lokesh Oriji to talk about this, the schools of Dehradun.
yeah,
Yeah, of course, we've all heard of the Doon School and the several other schools in the valley, and of course, the schools in Missouri as well. Uh, very interestingly, if you look at the philosophy with which the Doon School was started, if you read the early history of the Doon School was offered more than 300 acres of land in the Hathi Vadakala area. And S.R. Das, who was the founder of the school, visited Dehradun uh, and opined that such a large estate would not suit the setting up of a school. They wanted a smaller estate. And so finally, the Chandbagh estate was selected as the site for the establishment of the Doon School. And the Forest Research Institute subsequently moved uh, from, uh, from the Chandbagh estate to its present site, and the Doon School was established. Uh, there are several other schools, older schools of the Doon Valley, like for instance, we have the Colonel Brown School and Mrs. Linnell School, which became uh, the Vellum Boys
Yeah.
School later on. Uh, each school has its own interesting history. Today, we have a culture of corporate schools where big money is invested in the setting up of schools. But most of these schools were built brick by brick. They were built by great teachers that came in from all parts of the world. Like, for instance, Mr. Foote, who was the first headmaster of the Doon School, was brought in from Eton. And the other master was brought in from the other top school of Europe. So, a lot of these teachers dedicated their lives to teaching, and and even the not so public and elitist schools, like for instance the MKP or the CNI, uh, have had a very checkered past. Like if you visit the CNI in the Paltan Bazaar and if you see the building, the stone infill building of the CNI, you can imagine the kind of grandeur the building would have had in its heyday. uh, all these schools have had a very, very significant history, which needs to be visited, and it is also uh, up to the schools to inculcate this sense of history amongst the students. Like for instance, a school like Doon School, the campus itself has so many beautiful trees and has more than 300 species of birds, which the school is trying to actively the knowledge of which the school is actively trying to impart to the students. So I think every school must work in that direction so that the students that pass out of these schools, who will become leaders of tomorrow, go out with this message of conservation of our built heritage, of our natural heritage, and of our intangible heritage.
Thank you. Moving on, we must now come to the people who made Dune what it is today. And there's some very important signatures of from the field of art, culture, literature, who have contributed immensely to the Doon Valley, and who we acknowledge as people who have been associated with the Doon Valley in a very meaningful manner. So, to both my panelists, take your pick. Ajay Sharma ji.
uh, I'll take Wilson Pahadi, you know.
Arey wah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Hmm.
The earlier days of Wilson Pahari are not known, very well known, you know, and there's not much written about his earlier days, how he came to India, and you know, and there are certain other theories, you know, that he was a kind of a he was participating in Afghan war, and he abandoned the army there and came to Missouri. And there are certain fictional accounts also, you know. But probably, you know, in those times, you know, when George Everest was there, Frederick Young was there, probably Cotley was there in Missouri, you know. So this guy landed up in Missouri, and from there he was guided by Frederick Young towards the state of Tehri, because it was feared that he's absconding from the army, and he'll be taken back and a prisoner if anybody finds him, you know. So he kind of he was an adventurer and he was a sure shot, you know. It was said that, you know, in his regiment, you know, it is an account given by somebody that in the regiment, you know, the pot was always, you know, hot and fuming, you know, if you have a person like Frederick Wilson with you, you know. He was a sure shot, you know, actually. So he traveled up to Herschel and indulged himself in great games, you know, and uh, and he established a kind of a workshop of taxidermy there, and he started uh, uh, stuffing the birds, you know, and sending it to Missouri, and from Missouri to Kolkata, you know, because they were sold as souvenirs in those times. And subsequently, he got contract from the Raja of Teri, to kind of cut and transport the trees of Bhagirati Valley. And the devastation he did is unparalleled in the history of Uttarakhand. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. He has impacted the life and the style of Harshil and the river and the village Mukhwa there. There's no doubt about it. But the amount of destruction he did to the flora and fauna of district Uttarkashi and the higher reaches of district Uttarkashi is unparalleled.
So
And he
let me just
amassed a great, he
let me
amassed
just add
great,
something to this.
yeah,
To be honest, as a forest officer, I flinch when I read about his stories of pillage and plunder. But
yeah,
I also realized two things: that one, he lived in a different era.
yes,
That's for
yes,
one. And the
yes.
second thing is there's an element of romanticism about him.
There's
There are
no
so
doubt
many
about it.
stories, and he comes out as a larger than life character, and
Yeah.
who is colorful in capital letters. I would say,
Yeah,
capital
there's no
letters.
doubt. There's no doubt
He
about it.
defined what a colorful personality
Yeah,
would be.
yes, yes, and he merged himself with the people of Harshil, and he married there, and he was totally the people's man. So he started this great enterprising, and he was the first person in India, maybe to transport the logs through the river system. When I was very young, way back in 70s, and my father was posted in Rishikesh, I used to go with him. I saw the loggers, and they were kind of standing with a long pole on the logs, in Munikireti area. It was evident. It was done even in recent times also. It
Yes.
stopped in late 70s or so. So he amassed great wealth, and then in his last days, last years, he shifted to Mussoorie and Dehradun, and he kind of bought properties in Mussoorie and Dehradun. And he was a person who stuck his own coin. And his coins are very popular. They were very popular in Harshil area, and he was also called the Raja of Harshil in those times.
Yes, that he was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and one Robert Hutchinson has written a wonderful book on him, the
Yes.
Raja of Harshil. So,
Yeah.
and then while in Mussoorie, he kind of was the present day Hotel Rockby was his residence, and Lokesh ji has done many walks here in Esley Hall, and he died here, but he was buried in Mussoorie. But he has a great impact on the ecology of Bhagirati Valley. There is no doubt about it.
Yeah, Lokeshji, your pick. We are absolutely running out of time, so we'll have to be uh,
Yeah.
quick, I guess. Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, so so there have been great people who have lived in the valley, but if you were to ask me to pick up one person, I would again go back to Captain Young, who of course later became Major Young, because of my research in the Jaunsar Bawar area, where Captain Young was asked to do the land settlement of Ravine,
Yes.
and in doing the land settlement of Ravine, uh, he dis- he tried to sort out this case between the Raja of Tihri and the chieftains of Ravine for several years with no results. And finally, he decided to go to the temple in Hanol
Yeah.
and ask the Devta to decide upon the land settlement case. So I was fortunate to have read the journals of Major Young, which I found in the British Library in London. And I don't think anyone had read the journals before that. And it was a complete revelation for me to read how, a 30-year-old British trained civil servant would decide to go to a remote temple in Jaunsar, travel for 10 days on his horseback just to seek a judgment from a devta. So this was a kind of a very different culture, trying to understand the cosmology of a completely different culture and coming to terms with it. Not many officers in the present day have this kind of sensitivity, which Major Young displayed through his journals. But he has many other firsts to his credit, like I mentioned earlier, the experimentation with potato, with the cultivation of tea, and of course establishing the hill station of Mussoorie. So my pick would be Major Young, but of course there have been great authors, there have been great personalities. Ruskin Bond comes to mind. Nayantara Sehgal ji comes to mind. If you look at vernacular literature, then you have Mohan Rakesh, you have Rahul Sanskritan, who is a great traveler and who's written some of the greatest books on travel in the Himalayas and beyond. So a lot of these great personalities were attracted to the valley and to the hills, and Dehradun has been fortunate to have a fair share of these great
I would,
authors.
I would, I would like to add one more name to that list.
Yes,
That is
please.
also Pandit Leeladhar Jagudi ji,
Yes,
Yes,
and
yes,
yes,
we know he has made a mark for himself in
yes,
the field of Hindi poetry and is widely
yes.
acknowledged
yeah,
across the country and beyond.
yeah. He was
We,
awarded Padam Shri. Yeah,
yes, so we've reached the end of our time, but before we conclude, I would just like to take from both our panelists their views on what do you think is the role of civil society in the conservation of heritage, and how can each one of us meaningfully contribute to this cause of conservation of heritage. Uh, uh, Sharma Saab first.
yeah. Conservation yeah, is one of the most difficult things to do, And what Lokesh ji has started, been there, doing that, and it has done a great job to make people aware of the heritage around there in Dehradun, And I was also, inspired by, these walks, So the first and foremost thing is uh, to make people aware and to make people understand that the conservation of the heritage is one of the most important thing, and uh, advocacy is also very important, like the shore well, behind the kacheri, it is in such a dilapidated state, it should be taken into it should be used as a destination, proper tourist destination, and there are so many places, even in the western part of Dehradun, the archaeological department has still to do much work, Uh, so awareness among the people is the most important thing, to make them aware and to kind of educate them how to conserve the natural heritage and the heritage of Dehradun.
Thank you. Lokesh Oriji, in many ways, you are the flag bearer of these efforts in the Doon Valley.
Yeah.
What would be your take on this?
Uh, I think Samir ji, all of us are the flag bearers because what Ajay ji has done has greatly inspired us. He has, on his own, he has inspired so many young people to work on heritage. Even you, as an individual who has evinced so much interest in nature amongst young people. So yes, heritage is in a country that is aspiring to become industrialized, that is aspiring to become economically developed. Heritage sometimes is put on the back burner. It is given low priority by government agencies. But as individuals, I think, as Ajay ji said, we must make ourselves aware. We must learn more and more about our heritage because that is who we are. That is what our identity is, and it starts with basics. So when we do these walks, we take people around. I call it the university on the street because
Yep.
we are teaching people about history. We are talking to them about nature in a very informal way, in a very fun way, and people are imbibing that. And after that, it becomes a part of citizenship. When somebody is trying to, or vandalize something, or when someone is trying to, like for instance, I go on the street in the morning for a walk and I see all these little fires on the street side. I keep asking the sweepers ki bhai aap ye kyun jala rahe ho. It'll cause pollution. So if all citizens were to do something like that and ask the sweepers not to burn in the open, I think our air quality would be much better. Similarly, with the heritage sites, similarly with the trees, that if people were aware and they were ready to question, ready to take up these causes, uh, not in a very activist kind of way, but in just a citizen kind of way, asking questions, being aware of what is precious, what needs to be saved, uh, and if these sites are documented, like for instance, if we had a uh, directory of the trees of Dehradun, the great trees of Dehradun, it would be a great document that could help save these trees. From our perspective, we have tried to do a directory of wall paintings. We have documented all the sites where the wall paintings existed, and this is becoming a part of a national directory which is being published by UNESCO. So it starts with documentation, it starts with listing, and it also starts with citizenship, active citizenship in protecting what is of value in terms of history and heritage.
Thank you. We absolutely run out of time.
Yeah.
And on that note, let me end by saying that we can protect only what we love and we can love only what we understand. So, the key takeaway from this session for me is that we must try and learn more about our heritage, try and understand more about our heritage, and the protection will follow automatically once we understand what this means, what value this holds for us in our lives. It has been wonderful talking to both of you for me, and I'm sure our other guests who have joined us today would also have enjoyed this discussion amongst ourselves. Thank you once again, gentlemen. It was a privilege and a pleasure talking to you. Thank you and have a good day ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very
Dr. Siddharth.
much.
Thank you, Ajay ji.